Bruce Batchelor is, now, it's either the inventor or an inventor.
I think we could say an inventor, because certainly there are so many components to it that has to be put together. Who invented toner and xerography, and who invented the internet, and who invented authors, and their content. So yeah. I'll go with an inventor.
Okay, I am taking the off your website though.
Well, there's parts of what I could say is that I was the inventor, organizer of a print-on-demand process. Okay. That's a publishing process that used print-on-demand technology, bringing in other components to it. I certainly didn't invent the machine that did it, and I probably wasn't the only one that was imagining that at some point authors would be able to have some control. And, that had been going on for decades and stuff. But to put it all together and make it work as a functional business, that's the first part. It's okay for lots of people to dream of it. Maybe think that they've figured it out. But if they can't make a viable business out of it that goes on and supports those authors forever, then that's really what I can claim.
That's the main difference, is viability, isn't it? Okay, so an inventor of the print-on-demand based book publishing process. He's the founder of Trafford Publishing, which was established in 1995. He is the publisher to more than 8,000 authors from more than 100 countries during his 11 years as Trafford's publisher and CEO, during which time he built the business to more than $10 million in annual sales. He is a book marketing expert and author of Book Marketing Demystified. Welcome to the Bibliophile.
Well, thank you. It's lovely to be here.
So I recently interviewed John Thompson about his new book, Book Wars. And one of the striking things about that book is, to me anyway, the revelation that self-publishing is huge. It's way bigger than most people realize. And as a pioneer in that business, I wanted to talk to you about, the technology that you used, print on demand. First off, could you please tell me what it is?
Well, Nigel, at its most basic form, it's using machines that were set up originally for print shops to do short volumes, so that if a print shop was only doing up a few hundred business cards or doing some documents, then here was the ever-evolving, ever-getting better machines. Xerox was a leader in this, but IBM was another one. Ricoh was another one. And they were all making these machines that we can think of as photocopiers, essentially, because they use the same xerography technology, which is actually powdered plastic dust that is fused onto a paper through an electric process there. And that's all driven by an image that either in first days was captured by the piece of paper being put under a glass, is sort of like photographed and then transferred on. But later it became to be a series of, you could send a file such as a PDF. And then, okay, now we have a way of producing a short run of the black and white pages. Later on, color pages, as the color, we can call these printers, devices that came along. And then there was the sort of the adding on of, okay, well, we need to have some way of holding these together that looks much like the conventional printing process or the modern printing process. And so you have to be able to put on a glued binding to make it into, sometimes called a perfect binding, to make it be able to be wrapped up with a cover and look like a trade paperback. And so, this technology, which was being used for other developed for other purposes, was something that, many of us could look at and say, oh, that's getting very close to being able to produce a book that's indistinguishable from one that had been printed with ink on plates and run through a big machine. And the huge advantage of this was that you could just do one, or you could do two, and you could change the file. You could send anything through. And then, of course, once the color devices came out, then suddenly you could start doing a full color illustrated children's book and things like that. So that was a wonderful device. The fact that they existed somewhere didn't really solve the problem for an author who wanted to publish a book and get out there in front of the public. And publish really includes two components. One of the component is to put the material into a form, and then the next part is to make it available to the public. So that was a bit of some work there with these machines. I had been actually working on self-publishing for decades before that, and always, wondering, okay, well, how do we get through this barrier? We can't get these things into bookstores and everything else. And then someone said to me, oh, hey, why don't you go and look online? I was quite involved with the internet for other clients doing management consulting and stuff. And then, oh, why don't you put a notice online that someone could find that they could then buy the book, and then we'll print up one book at a time. And of course, this is only possible if everybody knows to go to the internet to find out, that's where books are. And going back to the mid-90s, when hardly anybody had internet connections, or if they did, they were using a dial-up modem, which meant you couldn't be on the phone at the same time. And it was all pretty hard for people to maneuver. And then the World Wide Web was introduced, and then you could start to get better and better connections. And so it was at that point that, I realized, okay, we've got to take this technology, and now we have a way for people to find out about a service, and we also, the public could have a way of getting in contact with us to order one book to be printed and then sent off. And so it was waiting for these extra pieces all to come together. We had to get a small early stage perfect binder. And then we actually had to invent scoring machines that were infinitely adjustable on demand so that we could score the covers and stuff like this. So we were getting all these little pieces and lining them up, and delightfully things were happening. Like there was a rollout of broadband. And so people were now spending more time online. And a company out of Seattle that started up the same time as we did in the book business called Amazon started pouring billions of dollars into advertising to get everybody to think, well, you could go on the internet to look for books. This is a natural thing for everybody. They were saying, where would you go for a book? Do you go to the bookstore and ask your bookseller, or do you go online? And so they spent so much money doing that was great for us, because it suddenly meant that this whole thing was viable, that people could sell their books online. And then we made a pioneering agreement with Amazon that they would carry all our books. And so we could then say to an author, hey, if anybody can get to Amazon, which they would, they could find our books there. Amazon would send us the order, and we would send that out. And there was all the system all then set up, is that people could somehow promote their book online. Amazon could take the order in any currency, any time of the day, and we could print up the books ourselves. Now it's got to the point where Amazon has its own printers. Yes. And has its own service that sort of essentially replicated and did even more for what Trafford was doing, and as it added on ebooks. But essentially, it's taking whatever tools are available and grabbing any extra tools that come along that fit that pattern, and making that into a viable business, into a service. Because if you don't have the whole service together, you've got individual authors who are each trying to figure out, how do I negotiate with Amazon to get my book on there? How do I get it bound, or what I can do? You needed a service together, and that's what we did. That was Trafford.
So without Amazon, there's no Trafford.
There was Trafford, and we were actually up and viable and running before that. but the success of it and the rollout of it was certainly vastly accelerated because there was Amazon getting people the idea, where do you buy books, where do you look for books, where do you search for books? You go online.
Yeah. So they put all this money out to provide you with a pretty decent online bookstore, in effect.
Yes, we had our own online bookstore, and then we had theirs, and so this is good. We were covering a different routes, and we were also using another distribution channel, which was making the books available to bookstores. But to bookstores, we were only making them available on a firm sale basis. We weren't getting into the trap of returnable books, where there's this huge gamble. We weren't sending them out on consignment, so we never got into that. I knew the danger of that from various projects before. To me, it didn't seem like anything we wanted to get involved in.
Interesting. So what did you invent then? Pulling all these machines together? Is that what you invented?
I guess it's a process, and when you invent a process, you're pulling together different pieces, and then you're making decisions about what pieces to include, what to not include, how to cost this, how to put it into an actual business, how to promote it. So there were a myriad of decisions that had to be made about what not to do, as well as what you could do.
You invented a process, and that process basically involved identifying the equipment that would make all this work, and you had the online component that would help you to sell it. Is that correct?
That's correct, and those are two of the components that had to be considered and thought up. But there was lots of other parts, like, for example, figuring out how are authors going to know about us, right? How are we going to tell authors about it? And then how do you get the idea from the author's mind, their pieces of paper, their scraps, their typewritten stuff, into a format that could be printed? So there was all of that process to be understood and somehow managed, and decide what stuff do we do and what do we not do, and what do we farm out to other people, recommend out. For example, editing. Editing is so subjective. How do you decide when a book's ready? And some author may need, arguably, some editing. You may think it's fine, or benefit it. And if you gave it to 3 editors, you get probably 4 different ideas about what should be happening with this thing. So there's a lot of subjective things. So that's part of the decision making was, how do we deal with this whole concept of what the material is, what's our responsibility, what are we trying to do, how are we helping people, and do that in a way that's viable, so that it doesn't sort of disenfranchise the author, and it also doesn't exploit the author, and it allows for creativity to be expressed in a way that honors it and that maybe improves it, and as much as possible tries not to ruin it.
So you weren't providing the traditional publishing service not even service. What publishers do is they select, and then they take a risk on it. You basically were saying, anyone who's got an idea about a book, we're happy to talk to.
Yes, we decided earlier on that we were not going to be curating. We were not going to be doing that. And, there's lots of rationales for doing that. One of which, important one is that it's almost impossible to figure out in advance which one is going to be viable. And there's lots of stories in the publishing industry. You've probably had people on that have told you that, Goodnight Moon got rejected 42 times before someone picked it up. And, all these other great stories about how hard it is for someone to get published. And so, part of the rationale that I came up with was, that's fine. The publishing industry can keep on going. We're not going to have any dent in there. They've got, slush piles that, you have to crawl over, to get to your desk, and
you wanted that slush pile because that's all potential business for you.
That's right. Yeah. When I was making Trafford, I had been an author. I had been a self-published author before and helped other people. I had a great respect for people who wanted to say things and do things themselves. Going way back to being a sort of a rebellious teenager. I was the editor of the high school yearbook. And at that point, I had a bit of an epiphany, which was up to that point, much of the education system had been, this is the truth because it's in a book. Because it's in a book, and some books were the Bible, but everything else, our textbooks and everything else were books. And this was authority figures. I was not too impressed with authority figures. This is the era of the Vietnam War, any amount of injustices that were going on. And I was certainly someone who was predisposed to not really being a fan of authority. And at that point, I said, oh, hey, here's the yearbook. I'm working on the yearbook. What I'm writing down right now, what I'm typing up, is going to be typeset and it's going to be published in a book. Hey, I'm the authority now. Suddenly, I could be an authority. We had a high school a newspaper. I could write something that would go in there, and people would say, "Well, it's written down, so it must be an authority." And I took that and I thought it's very unfair that only, the publishing industry should be controlling all that's in there. So when I was coming to Trafford, I was coming from the point of view of, I really wanted to help all the authors. I wanted to make the system fairer. I wasn't driven by how much money to make. My mindset wasn't a business. I didn't even want us to have a business, but I thought, okay, well, I've got to have this happen, we have to call ourselves a business. We got to get incorporated. We got to, borrow a little bit of money and get something going. But I wanted to, during my tenure there, turning it into something like a cooperative or something else. I really wanted to get away from we're doing this because of money. And my emphasis to everybody all the way along is, let's do what's right for the authors and the money will follow. The viability will follow. We have to look after what's good for the authors. As long as we're looking after the authors' interests, then this will all work. And so that was always what we were doing. We were always trying to help the authors as much as possible, make arrangements and stuff like that. It wasn't about trying to be a big .com or anything else. It was all very heady that it was happening during the .com era. And we were growing exponentially all the time. And eventually had offices in the United States and England and Ireland as well. But the whole focus was, let's have a service, let's help authors get their material into a format, later formats, and available to the public in a respectful manner.
Human beings, I think, are fulfilled when they create things. And so you use the term authors, but the cliche is that everyone has a book in them. Anyone that approached you, you're not just going to say, no, you're not an author, I'm not going to do business with you. It's anyone.
Essentially, we did have some guidelines of stuff that we wouldn't accept. Of course, anything that was just, we thought just too mean and nasty, and that could have been for any reason, but mean and nasty.
Did you always read the manuscripts or not?
Nigel, you got to understand the scale. We were publishing 200-300 books a month. Even someone who loves books as much as yourself wouldn't probably be able to read 300 books a month.
Right.
So no, we didn't. But they were being sort of scanned, and they were as the people are working on them at our end, anything that needed to be rejected, stood out, and people would say to me, hey, here's one that I don't know, if we even want to bother with that. And we had enough people coming to us that didn't have to accept everything.
Yeah, so the liability is on the author, obviously. It's a bit like Facebook now. I mean, they don't have much of a rigorous program. They just, if something doesn't look good, maybe they'll stop it from appearing. But it's certainly not a rigorous evaluation of whether or not something is libelous or hate literature or whatever.
Well, I just like to clarify something in there, is that under the Canadian laws and British laws, the printer is also liable for libel. And that dates back to the era when, most books were self-published, and they were collaborative ventures with the guy that owned the printing press. So if you go back to, Lewis Carroll and, some of these, you can actually go to University of Oxford Press and you can look through the old historic records and you can see how many came in and paid for the printing to be done. And other books, from that era, the printer would sometimes say, oh, this looks like a good deal. I'll go in on this business venture, but every single one of them was a business venture. So all the books were self-published back in the days. The laws were set up so that the printer was also liable. And that's partly because authors might vanish. They might be publishing under a pseudonym. They might be broke, but the printer actually had a building and a machine and some source of income from a newspaper or something else like that. So we were aware that we could be liable, and so we would put it in our contracts to say that the author, is accepting all the responsibility and, make sure that we're indemnified and everything else. But that doesn't really help when you've got one person off in Kentucky that's put in some hate literature or something else, or something that's obviously defaming. How would you even find that person? And we would be then targeted. So we were looking at things and also keeping our fingers crossed. And as it turned out, we, never got into a lawsuit. We did have some people sometimes making claims, and some of them were entertaining. Somebody would say, I think that, I'm, going to launch a lawsuit because one of your books mentions my name in it. So I'm demanding that you send me a copy so I can actually read it. And they say, well, wait a minute.
You paid for it.
That's right, buy a book if you want. So we were fortunately able to head off any of the stuff that was obviously illegal. Over the 11 years I was there, 8,000 some books or something like that. We never had a lawsuit about that.
Okay. Now, getting back to your choosing the right equipment and the right services to offer. So precisely, what did you choose equipment-wise and also service provision-wise?
The equipment-wise it was evolving all the time as the equipment came available and as we could aspire to do more. We started off in a partnership with a local print shop that they would print up the books, and then after maybe a couple of years, as we got enough volume, we started to get our own machines, and we started off with some very small ones, some tabletop printers.
Like what?
Well, I can't remember. I think the very first ones might have been Konica desktop printers, the one that you could actually have in your home. And we got up to having a few of those, and then we realized, okay, well, we need to get up to some other ones. And then we ended up being the largest customer for Ricoh. They were featuring us in ads in printers magazines and stuff like this, and we actually kept expanding the size of the print shop. We were in a building that kept evicting other people so that we could keep expanding and taking over more space in it. And then we got Xerox machines finally, and then I think we might have had a Hewlett Packard one. But these are then start becoming machines that come on the back of a flat deck, and are hoisted in by a crane, and are 20 feet long, and these are major machines. And at one point, I think we had a dozen or 13 of these high production machines, and then maybe 2 color printers. And so it was a major operation that we had pallets of paper coming in and pallets of books going out the other side. And so we got to the volumes of stuff that we were printing ourselves, that all the delivery companies were starting to coming us, and they wanted the contract to ship our goods, So this would be UPS and FedEx and DHL. And part of that was they were trying to build up their business, and they knew that we were a big enough client, they could give us a special deal, because if you're trying to fly a plane from Victoria, where we were, to a next hub, it doesn't do you any good to have that plane 1/4 full. You might as well fill it up with a bunch of Trafford books. And so there was a little wrinkle in the United States. I know this is way off track. In the United States, a company like FedEx can't offer special deals to some clients and others because of a law down there. Otherwise, that would be some sort of predatory, antitrust or something like that situation. But they could come to Canada and give us a different deal. So it turned out that we were able to just play them off against each other, so that it was cheaper for us to ship a book by courier from Victoria to Florida than it was for a business in Florida to send a book to Florida, because we could have a special price. And
that's
so
freaking ironic, because right now, well, maybe not ironic, annoying. Right now, the price to ship a book across the United States is about $4. You try and get that book up to Canada, it's $25. Anyway, that's just close to the bone. But anyway, so okay, so you had these machines. That was the printing. What other machines did you have?
Well, in just the production part of it there, then it would have to have bindery equipment, right? So you have to be able to gather these books up, and then as they came out, chop them into the appropriate piles, and then get the colored covers, which would be scored at the right spot so that they would fold right, and glue them together. And so we then had these big guillotine presses that are sort of scary to even be beside, because you could see how much they could cut through, Then we would also have all the machines that you wouldn't think of, but you need all the packing and shipping and little machines that would slide under a pallet, and you could pump them up and then you could wheel them around. And then we needed to have people there that were in the shipping department. You start getting a whole department that is happening there. And then anyways, it gets into a bigger and bigger facility. And at one point we contemplated setting one up in England, in Crewe, at our office there. But there was such a setup at that step at that time between getting from nothing to a full production facility that we just couldn't see the volume there, and instead started to take Ingram up on its offer. Ingram runs a service called Lightning Source, and now Ingram Spark, and they were starting to have printing plants in different spots. And so we said, okay, well, how about we supply you with the files, the PDFs of the insides and the covers and all the metadata, and you be able to do the fulfillment at your end. Orders from Amazon were then going to Lightning Source, Ingram, who was printing up in a few spots. And now that network is spread out over the world, where Ingram has more plants, and then Amazon itself has set up plants, so that it's got a printing plant in Ontario, and it's got a few in the United States at its big centers, and in England, and made arrangements, deals in Germany and Spain. So the dream now has been extended out, which was never to print up all the books on demand at one central spot and then have to have all this couriering, but to have it happen closer to the home. Yeah. Okay. So that's equipment there. We never got into owning our own trucks. So I couldn't put the big dog logo on the side of the trucks, but there were a lot of boxes going by that had our logo on it, being shipped all over the world.
I don't think we captured that in the early part of our conversation. We were talking about it beforehand, but you've got a great big image of a beautiful dog behind you. That was your company logo, correct?
That's correct. And there's a fun story behind that. The early days is we're setting up a website, and I had to figure out, well, what's a website going to be for a service like this? And we didn't really know, because we were the first ones. And we thought, well, I guess it's going to have a bookstore, so we need aisles in the bookstore. We need to be able to sort it. And then somebody says, hey, Amazon's doing this. And we say, oh, okay, let's do that in our store. Amazon at that point was very, very small. But anyways, we as we're building this website, one of the fellows there, Gord Hooker, who was clever with the computers and layout and stuff like that, and he said, "Well, we'll have the logo here," and he just stuck the picture of Tyee there as a placeholder.
The dog.
And pretty soon the authors were contacting us and said, "Well, I chose you. I wanted to work with you because there's a picture of a dog." And then we kept thinking, "Yeah, but that's just the temporary thing. That's just the temporary thing." And it went on for a couple of months until all we were getting was great reactions to this dog. And so it was a happy accident that we said, "Okay, well, I guess that will be our image, our icon there."
Yeah, that's a lesson for online entrepreneurs right there.
Yeah, and what's the lesson that you're taking out of that, Nigel?
Use a dog.
Certainly animals, people connect with animals, and they connect with faces, and they connect with images like that. Yeah.
Okay, so you pulled together all of this. Anyone who had a book in them, you're interested in talking to, I assume.
Yes. We're interested in letting them know that this service exists if they want to access it.
So how did you do that?
Well, in the early stages, back in the 1990s, because we were starting in 95, we started advertising in magazines. There was a couple of magazines, American Legion. There was a number of other ones. Names escape me at a moment. But you could actually put a small display ad in and say, "Contact us." This, and we could then look at them. And sometimes you get split runs, or you put in different ads and you said, "Contact us and use this code word," or something. And we would know which ads work better than others. Did we have an ad that had a picture of the dog in it? Did we have one in it that just said, "Publish your book" in huge letters? Did we have one saying something else, "Your book, your way"? So we worked on that, and that was building us quite quickly. And we were using search engine optimization on our pages and best practices. And it was just started rolling, partly because there was such a huge demand. Hundreds of thousands of people wanted to use this process. And before, the only thing they could do is go to one of the infamous vanity presses who would, extract a fortune from them. At that point, vanity presses were charging a minimum of $5,000 and often $20,000 for a service that was useless, essentially. This was a lot of money. And those companies existed because there was so much demand that they could just skim off the top, the rich people. So we were offering a service for $500. And this is part of my goal, is to provide the service. That was the most important thing, is to provide the service, not to try and just skim off a certain group of people.
What'd you get for your $500?
Oh, at that stage, that would be an ISBN. It would be registered with the National Library. It would have copyright and publication data in it. You would have certain number of copies.
100 copies?
Oh, probably 10, but you could buy more at a very reasonable price for $10 each or something. And that was part of the idea of what's the point of sending you, the part of the theory was that you didn't want all those extra copies in your basement or something else like that. And didn't want to warehouse them. And so, that was the basic package. And then there was another one that was called, something else. And there was a bestseller package that was, I think, $1,500, something like that. So the $1,500 meant that your book was going to be displayed on Amazon, and you would get more copies, and that we'd also give you some bookmarks and, business cards and maybe a poster and, a bunch of other things that would be added on. You may be able to have more pictures in your book. So it might have been something. We never offered ourselves an editing service, but what we did do is we had what we called a talent pool. And so if anybody wanted to use one of those people that was on the talent pool, they could go there and they could make whatever deal they wanted. And it was an honor system that the people who were the contractors were supposed to send us 5%. But we never tried to keep track of it or anything else. We just said, please, we're being good. We're giving you a stream of customers. If you want them, treat them well. If we hear of any complaints or any problems, we'll probably just take your name off the list. That was the encouragement for them to do a good job. And so when Google started up, around the year 2000, and the search engines were getting going again, Google started to allow you to pay for placement on search engines. They called it AdWords, and you could see them on the right-hand side. So we were one of the first companies to actually get involved with Google AdWords and realize that buying this space on the side here, you actually bid for it. You say, okay, I'll pay 1 cent or 10 cents or 1.34 cents to be at the top. And you could see usually about 3 or 4 of them on the side. So we found out we could bid for the word like self-publish or publish or something else like this, right? And so when someone types in these words, our ad would show up on the side. But we found out it didn't make any difference in terms of response, whether we were in first, second, or third spot. So we would then bid only as much as we needed to get one of the top 3. And we started realizing this is a lot better than that magazine advertising I was talking to you before, right? And we could do ABBA testing. We could test one ad against another one. What are the words to say here? Should we actually buy a little image to put in there? And then when people responded to that, they would come to landing pages. So we could check out which landing page was the one that converted or best. So we got quite sophisticated in that. We realized we could scale this up very, very quickly. It's like if you want more business, you just turn it up on the tap, and you just turn it up if you wanted more. We were spending $100,000 a month on Google AdWords. It was enough that Google gave us a rep. It wasn't dealing with some, impersonal thing behind the screen. There was somebody there and they were helping us all the time, giving us coaching about what we could do to be more effective because they wanted this to work. So we were a very early stage, involved with Google and Amazon, and often we were pioneering and writing the very first contracts for things to happening and negotiating, how things could happen because we recognized that they were useful to us. But we could spend $100,000 and get $1 million worth of business. So, then it's up to us to say, okay, well, you've got the $1 million worth of business. Don't spend more than $900,000 in expenses in providing the service. If you do, then you're going to go broke. Try and have a little bit left over. That's part of the running the whole service is to try and keep going with getting more people, but then do you need another printing device? Do you need more staff? Do you need, trying to manage this? So it's sort of like driving a car with your, 1 foot on the gas and 1 on the brake as you're just trying to go just fast enough. You don't want to surge ahead too far. And, it was quite a dance. And at the same time, we were thinking of, okay, well, what else is happening? Maybe we need to get into, authors need to be able to have their ebooks available. So how are we going to manage for ebooks? And what's an ebook going to look like? Is it going to be a PDF? How is that going to be sold? Or is it going to be turned into one of these formats like Mobi or, the Kindle ebook, EPUB? And if so, how are we going to market those and what kind of security we're going to have? And so we're always innovating about what else we could do. And what could we do? What other types of books? We got to the point where we could do full color books and get them to the point where someone could have a 32-page children's book. They send us the drawings. That could be a full color book that could retail for less than $10. This was always, okay, there's something else going on. There's this opportunity to do things. So it was exciting times, but again, it's this idea of, 1 foot on the brake, 1 on the pedal, which one of these ideas, there's no shortage of ideas what to do at that point.
What you're doing is you're tapping in to this desire to be a published author that had been thwarted for so many years.
Yes.
And the numbers of people that are actually published by a traditional publisher is minuscule compared to the number out there that want that. And this too would be a stepping stone. If one of your authors has one of the books that you've published for them succeed, well, then the traditional guys are all going to get interested then, aren't they? And it does bring more prestige when a traditional publisher selects you.
Oh, yes. I think, the idea most authors have is they don't want to be involved in the marketing and they would like the prestige. and they would, they might grumble a little bit, but these are sort of pretty minor grumbles. First world problem is that you don't like the color of the cover or something that Random House has chosen for you, something like that. You wish you had a bigger advance. We always left it in our contracts, recognizing that is that Trafford had no rights to the book or to film versions or anything else. And that I knew that was right from the start. I didn't want to have that. Having been an author myself, I realized that I didn't think it was ethical for Trafford to be asking for that or trying to bargain for those rights when I didn't think we deserved it. We weren't putting up the money; the author was putting up the money. And so I didn't think it was ethical to ask for that. And there were lots of books that did go on to get published by conventional publishers, and also books that led to other projects, that became movies, that became something else, or else they went to some complete departure, had nothing, seemingly nothing to do with further success as a published author. Sometimes people would meet somebody and get married. Other things would happen in their careers, or they would just connect up with other people. There were people that were Second World War or Korean War vets that would write a story about their history, and then they would connect after 20 years to somebody else on their platoon, and they could get together and share stories. Well, what's that worth? That's worth huge, huge amounts. That could change somebody's life for the next while, those connections. And I think that's partly why people write the books originally, is to have some effect. They want to get some connection with people. They will get distracted with the idea of, what's your goal? Oh, my goal is to earn back all the money, or my goal is to sell so many books. But really what they're talking about is they want to make a difference in the world. They want to make a difference in their own lives. They want to be something different. And they see this process of writing a book as some way to have some change happen, get these ideas out of my mind, get some other people to talk about them, or do something, make myself feel good, get rid of my sense of frustration about not having the books, having my ideas organized or something. Just having finished the manuscript is a huge step for a lot of people, because it means they got their information organized. They finally got it all down. There it is. And if the next step is then to share that with whoever, wherever it goes, is put it in motion. Let's see what happens to the universe. That's what I was trying to do, is to encourage people to finish the books. That was a key part of it, because there's so many frustrated people out there that want to get a book published, but a lot of them haven't finished the book, and they haven't finished the book.
It's tough.
And
bloody tough.
Yeah. And they haven't finished the book in part because they get sort of near the end or partway through it, and they say, well, it'll never be published. What are my chances of a conventional publisher? And so I wanted to be able to say to all those people, don't worry about that part. If you can get picked up by a conventional publisher, great. But you can always do this, and it's affordable, and we can get it out there. But go ahead. Stop worrying about that as an excuse for not finishing your book.
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. Well, everyone wants to make a difference, to leave a mark too, I suppose. And this is a nice way of doing it.
Yes. And certainly if they're only printing up as many books as are needed, they're not making a huge mark that is destroying the planet with extra books being printed up and stored and everything else. So I was always happy that what we were coming off was an environmentally friendly solution there, and especially as we've got into printing the books up further afield, and also the widespread use of electronic books, which don't have nearly the same footprint, and audiobooks.
Yes and no. The self-publishing printing on paper business has exploded. So there's a lot of paper that you guys are responsible for having used. Let's be clear on that.
Yes, but it's small quantities.
Yes, compared to what compared to the fact that the old technology demands that you produce several thousand to get a reasonable cost.
Yes. And that's the whole trade-off. The traditional way of thinking of it was always printing 1,000 so that you would have a low cost per copy, not a low cost in general, because the printers were always quite happy to print as many as you pay for.
Yeah. Okay. So anything happening along the way that we should flag, just in terms of the way the company grew to $10 million?
Well, it was it was a lot of fun, but it was exhausting in some ways. One CEO of a .com suggested this analogy to me, which I could certainly appreciate. He said, going to the office was like opening a door and walking into a fire hose. You were just inundated by what could be done, and a big challenge of a CEO is to try and say no to all of these things, or to try and get it under control, and try to say, well, this might be a good thing to be doing, this might be needed, and this thing is just loopy, or it's not ready yet. The world isn't ready for it. So that was always an interesting dance, and it was a sort of a wild ride, and it was also a bit taxing. You had to keep a level head and an understanding of why do all this as well. Especially when there's some parts of what a CEO does, or creating a business and changing it, molding it, stuff that is involved in some angst-ridden areas. If you've got a lot of employees, which we have ended up having, if each employee has a bit of a meltdown or something happen once a year, you suddenly got one a day. That, okay, here's all lovely people. Anybody can have a bad day or something, but now you're seeing it all the time. And so that's some of the unhappy parts about being a CEO of at that point a really fast growing company.
Yeah. Again, you didn't really have to worry about demand, did you?
That's right. There was a huge demand, and as can be seen by what's happening now. Now that Amazon has finally, and they took a long time, decided that they would get into the print business as well, and that's what Kindle Direct Print, is there to go along with the Kindle ebooks. I don't think that's a small business operation for them at all, although it'd be small for Amazon to bother with something like that. Okay. And they're extending the services that they're offering to authors all the time. Amazon has just started doing hardcover books, so you can have hardcover books on demand, printed up and then shipped around the world. So it's fun to see that. The audiobook business is also doing well, and the ebook business is doing really well, Smashwords and stuff. So what happened with Trafford is that after I left, it actually essentially went bankrupt, because
wait a minute.
Yeah. So the following, people that
in a way that's a tribute to you. Then is that what you're trying to say here?
Well, I'm not sure that just because the next person, isn't competent means that I was extra competent. Yeah. Right? Let's be reasonable about this. But I do believe that it was working fine and generating a profit, yes. And growing steadily, all through those years while I was at it. And so what ended up happening was that the subsequent, the people, the board of directors, I didn't own the whole thing. So the board of directors got impatient. They thought they knew what to do, and they went from thinking that this is all about money and selling it and making a profit, and what could they get rid of that was an annoyance, and how could they grow it. And they got very printing focused, because when you're having a business that's that size and you've got all that equipment, you can try and decide and say, what's the important part of this business? Are we making money because we're printers? Are we making money because we're publishers? Are we making money off of the e-business part? And so, and you have the expenses of actually marketing and finding these authors and then preparing the books and stuff like this. So It just depends on your internal bookkeeping, whether you decide that that print shop is making money or not, and are the the consultants that are talking with these people, are they making money? Is your IT department making money, or is that just an expense? Well, how about the people that are in the admin and bookkeeping? Are they making any money? You can decide where to attribute the costs, and to which division. And it was possible to look at the books and say, if you're a printer or you're coming from that thing, say, look at all these machines, look at how much volume is going through, and we can charge the author this much for a book, and we can sell it, and there's a little bit of margin on there. But that only happened if there was a stream of authors coming in and there was a stream of books. So what they did in their confusion, let's just say,
in their wisdom,
their own version of wisdom, is they decided to focus on just being a printing plant, and they actually gave away all of the authors and all of the front end of finding the publishers. They gave that away to Author Services, which was another rival company.
I don't understand.
Well, they said, there was another company that was called Author Services. It still exists. Author House, I guess it is, which has been a roll-up of Author House and iUniverse and, some of the other companies that came into existence not long after we set up and started going. We weren't the only ones after a year or two. No. And those were eventually bought up by Random House Ventures, which was their Random House's venture capital wing, right? And so Random House Ventures bought up a whole bunch of self-publishing operations, probably to the horror of the people that were in Random House's traditional publishing effort, that looked upon all of this as vanity press, horrible, nasty stuff you wouldn't ever want to be involved with. But anyways, higher up the corporate ladder, there were some people that said, okay, we're going to have a pot of money, and these people can go out and do ventures in the publishing field. And so you had Author House bought up by Random House, and then saying to its authors, by the way, if you use our service instead of Traffords, we're part of Random House, so you have a better direct line into the publishing house, which was absolute, it was just deception, really, because the traditional publishing house already had their huge slush piles. They already had their channels and coming in through literary agents and stuff like that. They didn't want everybody's stuff, right? So anyways, what ended up happening is, in this special kind of wisdom, I think we decided somebody else's other wisdom, they looked upon this and said, well, why don't we give all of our authors and all our files and all of our potential for getting more authors to this Author House, and in exchange, we'll get from them a loose agreement that they will use Trafford's printing facility for some of their books, right?
Right.
Okay. And so what ended up happening is Random House gleefully said, well, of course we'll take this. We don't even have to buy this. And this is the prospect list as well. 70,000 people that had contacted us that hadn't yet signed, right? That was in itself worth probably $7 million. But anyways, they gave that list away under the province that Author House would spend some money on some technology to more easily facilitate books being printed in Victoria, right?
Yeah.
And so what happened at that point is Author House gleefully, took all of this, all the titles and everything else, sent some work to the Trafford Printing Plant, but the Trafford Printing Plant, within about a year and a half, was broke and went into receivership.
Why is that?
Well, because they didn't have enough printing business.
Right.
They didn't have a stream of printing business. They had some that Author House was trickling to them.
I mean, the whole point of your success of your company was that you were providing a really neat one-stop shop for people who wanted to publish their own books.
Yes.
And I suppose they were kind of splitting that up a bit.
That's what they tried to do.
What about the marketing? Yeah, and what about the like, you didn't do any marketing for them other than online, right? You just put their stuff up in the various online stores, right?
We actually did provide them with some materials, that they could have their names on posters and bookmarks and stuff like that. And we also made sure that the books were registered through agencies. And we dabbled in some actual hands-on promotion work. But I was always constrained. The constraint I put on that is it actually has to work. Didn't want to just take money from authors and do a bunch of stuff that actually didn't sell any books. And that's very, very difficult, is to try and say to somebody, you give me $10 and I'm going to give you a profit. If you could, then everybody was doing that. Everybody quit their day jobs. And so it seemed to me that started to get a little bit predatory. And it was hard to manage and stuff. A few of the things that we did do, which were really fun, was we went to the big US book show that would be in New York or Washington.
Book Expo.
Yeah, Book Expo America. We would rent a few booths, and then we would ask any authors. We usually invite ones that we thought had a better chance of being picked up by conventional publishers or selling more widely. And we would split the cost of the booth. And that was so much fun because these authors came to New York and got a chance to be there, and they would walk around with an author badge. Something.
Yeah, you can't do that for all of them, though, could you? You couldn't do it.
No. Well, I mean, there were people that were trying to run services like that, and that was their only thing they were doing, right? Yeah. And they were charging authors a lot, and even the Chicken Soup for the Soul guys were doing that, trying to pay us $10,000, come to our boot camp, and we'll take you to BEA, and we'll do things like that. We were doing that with some, but it was just some of the fun parts was then we'd all go out to dinner, and Trafford would pay for the dinner, and we would have 10 authors there, and they're all sitting around. We'd sort of take over a big room of a restaurant, and they'd all be so happy, and they'd be talking to each other and exchanging things and stuff. And it was just such a joyous occasion. That was one of the things that was a lot of fun, is to go there and celebrate what's going on.
That I actually visited one of your booths like that and talked to a couple of the authors years ago.
Great.
Okay, so let's just winding it down. Now, this is sort of a Canadian nationalism question that most people really wouldn't be that interested in, but I sure am. And that is, here's a good, very successful Canadian company that sells out to the US. How come that happened?
It didn't even sell, unfortunately. This gets even more embarrassing. They just gave away all that, the guts of the operation. I don't know. I'm sure there's lots of what are we calling it? Other wisdom from companies in the States that's going the other way or something. But it was just unfortunate that happened.
This is Author's Solution.
That's the company that it went to. Yeah.
That's owned by Random House, you say?
It was, and then I think Random House eventually sold it to somebody else. Yeah. I haven't really bothered to track it. Doesn't really matter. My wife and I still run a boutique publishing company, publish about a book every 2 months or something else like that for people that want some hand holding. And then at that level, I can do the copy editing, and I can, and Marcia designs the covers, and we can actually provide some real one-on-one service to people. And that's a joy, because the authors, they're really interesting people, and somebody that's gone to the point of actually writing something down. There's a sort of a myth that, self-publishing authors are just flailing away in their, it's something that people are doing frivolously.
Yeah.
People don't frivolously spend years on a project. That's not frivolous. Frivolous is go gamble or something else like this. But if you have something that's a passion and that you keep working on, and then you're always thinking about, well, is this complete crap that I'm doing? Is this stupid? And they tell the neighbor they're writing a book, and the neighbor laughs at them and says, oh, you'll never be published. It's hard to get published. And they go through all of this sort of question about whether what's the value of it. But really, they're pouring their heart and soul out of this, and whatever it is. Maybe it's a dentist that's putting together a book about all the jokes about dentists, whatever it is, doesn't really matter. A poet, somebody that's writing their memoir from all the pain, somebody's got a how-to idea of what they want to do, change the world. This is passion. These people have invested in it. I'm in this very privileged position that people are coming to me with what's most important about their life and what they've poured the best of themselves into. I don't get to see all the other crap, I just get to see what's their passion. That is a real privilege and a joy. And so part of my job is to be respectful to these people for what they've put into it and their viewpoint and what they're doing. And then trying to, as an editor, as a copy editor, as advising on things, any part of this process, is to celebrate what they've done and trying to make it as best as it can be, so that I'm not going to rewrite somebody's books entirely. Sometimes I'll add a chapter, write something or something like that, and ask them if they, this is what they really mean, But I'm trying to take their idea and just make it work better for an intended audience. I'm not trying to change their idea. It's not my passion, it's theirs. And I want to honor that. So that's what the process is. And the fact that now that we can use Kindle Direct Publishing and Lightning Source, I don't have to be involved with a printing machine. I don't have to be involved with 150 staff. I don't have to be involved with boards of directors and investors or anything else. That means that I just get the joy part and I don't get the less joyful parts, And so that's fun. So we do that in sort of semi-retirement. That's fun. That's a real privilege to be able to do that.
It sounds to me, Bruce, like you're a traditional publisher now.
Well, except for the authors are still paying for it, right? They're paying for our services, and I'm adding a little bit of extra time. They're not paying me as much as I could charge in other situations. But when you go way back
you're
when,
selecting them. You have to select. You can't say yes to everyone who comes to you. Well, maybe there aren't a huge number, but I would assume that you select.
Yes, we deselect some.
Right.
If somebody comes to us and something we just entirely don't agree with, we just say, hey, why don't you try something else? This might be more suitable for you. Go down the road, go to Author Solutions, go to do it all by yourself and do it on Kindle Direct Publishing. Pass them on. There's no point in clouding up your life with extra angst that doesn't have a good outcome.
For sure. Anything else that you'd like to say that we haven't covered?
I think we covered an awful lot. You've done a good job of prying things out and then looking at them and saying, wait a minute, you just said that. What about this? Yeah. So well done, Nigel, on picking away at it, and thanks for wanting to explore what's actually going on behind and not just assuming there was something happening, and getting to a deeper level of what that whole the evolution of the print on demand based publishing system service environment, where it happened.
Well, part of the mission for my passion project is basically to understand the book at the present time and how it's evolved over the last 500-600 years. And as I say, I've just really become aware of the fact that self-publishing is as huge as it is. So thank you for shedding light on a really important feature of the book world.
You're most welcome. And when you say going back 500 years, you have to be remembering that was all print on demand too. It was monks in monasteries who were doing one at a time illustrated manuscripts, and those were paid by somebody. It was a business for the monasteries. And so now we've got different technology. We don't have to use the monks. We can use the big printing devices, the one-on-a-time printing devices, and we can also have the books available through audio and ebook formats too.
So Bruce, how can people get a hold of you?
Agio Publishing, AGIO publishing.com is the website for our publishing business. I'm simply bruce.batchelor@gmail.com if they want to send me an email.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much again for your time.
Well, thank you very much for interviewing me. I enjoyed it.